Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Grandma Selena was known and loved by everyone in the village of Pompeii, simply because she was so special, as if she were a fairy tale old woman. She was short, thin. She looked like she'd be blown away by a stronger breeze. But she stayed firmly on the ground until she was 98 years old. She was not sick almost. She rustled her household, always with a smile, and it is all the same that she had no teeth left. Instead of them, she had a false jaw, a simple one. Never quarrels, never swears, and in any conversation is polite, not proud, if necessary to apologize, if it seems to her suddenly that upset, offended something interlocutor. Selena knew how to listen if someone needed to talk, but she was not a gossip. She told about herself reluctantly, and that exactly from the moment when she was 47 years old. And what happened before that? What to talk about that? She waved away her dried palm with fingers curled like a bird's foot. I just lived. Now I'm living to the end. I'm tired. And since the old woman was of a respectable age, her stories belonged to such antiquity that they seemed to young people like gray tales, and to those who were middle-aged like pictures in which the person who presented them picturesquely, because of his own nostalgia, could embellish many things, however, quite untimely, not wishing intentionally to lie much and colorfully. But the main sign of Selena for others was that the old woman was lonely. She had come to the village as a pensioner, and since then no one had come to visit her, and she had never mentioned her relatives in conversation. But they knew for sure that she was not from the orphanage. At first, of course, someone tried to find out what happened to the grandmother's family, but then gave up in the end. If a person is so stubborn, so apparently there are reasons. Selena had always lived modestly and quietly in a small house on the very outskirts of the village. She didn't just live modestly, but even poorly. She bought so much food that it seemed impossible to feed a cat with it. She dressed in something that, apparently, was sewn not later than the middle of the last century, and with the passage of time, naturally, although Selena was independent like that, but she needed help. And the villagers helped. To chop wood, to fix a fence or roof. "Grandma, can I help you with something?" About 15 years ago, she was approached by the local henman Anthony, who had a mother, father, and 4 sisters living in the village. "I'm sorry to pry, but every year in June you take the bus to the city," Anthony continued carefully. Selena was generally a very poised person, but this time she looked so piercingly, with a kind of fire in the depths of her dark pupils. The flames, of course, I imagined, but the fact that he had stepped into forbidden, very private territory was quite clear. "This is my business." "I understand," Anthony sighed. "It's just that you're in the village all the time and here 1 trip a year. Maybe I can help you in some way." "Well, I don't know." "That's my business," Selena repeated and tapped the wand she always walked with on the ground. Okay. Anthony raised his hands and smiled conciliatorily. "Don't worry, Grandma. Let's talk about something else, shall we? I'm whitewashing all the trees here. Do you need to whitewash your garden? I can come by this weekend." "Thank you, Anthony," said the old lady in her usual tone. "Come in and help the old woman, and I'll treat you to a cabbage pie." But in the last 5 years, Selena's mysterious trips to the city did not happen. She spent all her time in the village, and her health had become very poor. And then, a few days ago, Selena died without waking up in the morning. She was discovered by Natalie, a neighbor who stopped by to see her grandmother about something important. In fact, the occasion was far-fetched. Natalie was just looking for an excuse to persuade her to take some food as a gesture of gratitude: a can of condensed milk, a bag of apples, some hams, and a box of good whole wheat pasta. The occasion was the day before Selena had told her daughter Natalie, who was a 4th grader, some old fairy tales. And Natalie thought she would tell her grandmother. "Your fairy tales, Selena, helped my daughter write her essay. She got an A. Here, please take them." Since the grandmother had no relatives, there was some fuss. It was necessary to choose a person among the villagers who would take care of all the affairs. Anthony volunteered, saying that it was necessary to do everything humanly and to see her off at the end and deal with the rest of the property. "Nobody's going to get it," said Harry, who was the village's source of all sorts of negative assumptions. He was just the kind of person who looked for negativity and deception everywhere, in everything and in everyone. Harry wrote out newspapers in which he talked about reptiloids, could argue to the point of hoarseness that the earth was really flat, did not believe in vaccinations, and believed in GMOs. The latter belief, however, quickly gave up its position. If someone called Harry to visit, he washed everything that was on the table, not interested in the composition and only praising and asking for additives. Officially, Harry worked as an electrician, but in fact he was also a plumber and a handyman. Natalie, who was folding lace napkins, bedspreads, and tablecloths, all the textiles in the deceased house, asked without turning around. Selena's house was as full of people as ever today, and neighbors had come to clean it up, to wash and clean everything, and at the same time, as Anthony had advised, to look for the will. Because she had no relatives, Harry shrugged and took from the shelf a porcelain bird whistle with a gel painting. He blew into it. Fool. Betty, another of the old woman's neighbors, wagged her finger at him. Do not whistle in the house, will not be money. And is this superstition suitable for such a house? Squinted the main expert of conspiracy theories in the village. It's already a poor house. Anthony, help me. The door to the closet was not locked, but it opened on springs so tight that Natalie was on the floor when she tried to open it. How did grandmother manage it? The closet was filled with winter clothes, some caskets, the dust. Natalie coughed. At least she kept the house clean. Too bad about Grandma, said Archie, the last of the neighbors to look in the closet. The boy, who had just turned 18 this spring, was jokingly referred to as Selena's grandson. Betty's son. He was probably the only boy in the village who visited the old woman's house almost every day, to help with the chores or just to chat about this and that. You should be out with young girls, not taking care of your grandmother, his older brother Jacob liked to say. Your grandmother has you bewitched or something. Depending on his mood, Archie would ignore such speeches, showing that he was above giving in to provocations, or he'd swoop in with his fists, a miniature brotherly brawl, just to make it clear that enough of this nonsense. Look how beautifully she's done it, said Archie, running his hand along the back wall of the closet, which, unlike the old walls, gaping with patches of peeling whitewash, was covered with stickers and posters of tropical birds, funny kittens, still lifes, cars. Original, commented Harry. And the house is ascetic. Maybe it's a visualization wall? What? Natalie didn't understand, and to get some use out of Harry, in addition to his role as a radio, she loaded him up with pots and pans. Bring it to the yard. A visualization board, Harry explained importantly. It is created to materialize wishes. It's scientifically proven that our thoughts are material. You think Selena wanted a tiger and a red Ferrari? Archie grinned. No, she was she was an outlet. I've never really looked in the closet, but I think she was just too shy to hang it in the house. And it's colorful busy. Okay, you'll be talking until tonight, Natalie said and reached to take the books off the top shelf first. Give me a stool. I'm not comfortable like this. Ouch. What's the matter? The shelf must have been attached to one side of the shelf, because as soon as Natalie grasped it with her hand, something in the wall cracked and the books fell down with it, right on the wall. And tore through it like thin plywood, which is what that wall was. The barbaric treatment of the deceased house is bad news, Harry said, and stretched out his neck and poked his finger at the hole in the wall. What's that? Anthony went to check. It had seemed to him from the beginning that the closet was a small space, but it turned out that there was more space in the closet than there was in the walls of the house. When the dust settled, he shone a flashlight behind the false wall. There was a void. To be more exact, a void and one object, a chest. Well, said Anthony, retrieving the find. Very interesting. The chest was taken into the room and placed on a table by the window. In fact, we should make it official, he started to say, but Harry jumped up. Oh, what's the holdup? I've got 2 more calls today, and I'm here with you. No, let's sort it out, and I'm off. Anyway, Pega was unstoppable, and in no time at all the flimsy padlock on the chest was broken off and the lid lifted. Anthony, Natalie, Archie, Harry, and Betty all gasped, because in the chest was money. Stacks of bills tied with rubber bands, and all of them were modern dollars. What's that? Betty's eyes widened. She was poor. For us, the second person to react was Harry. What? You've never heard of these? Oh, Selena. What an old woman. All she did was cry about having nothing to eat, expensive medicines, and now she's saved up. There's hands. Anthony closed the chest with a decisive gesture. Let's just calm down, okay? This is the deceased estate, and according to the law, if there are no relatives, it should be divided among all of us villagers. Harry looked at him resentfully. What do you mean, the right way? Anthony asked snidely. In good conscience, answered the most talkative man in the village. Why? Where else would it go, eh? Such wealth. Wait a minute, both of you. Natalie opened the chest again, snatched an envelope from the top of the pile of money and opened it. It looks like a will, and a letter. A will? Handwritten or notarized? Anthony asked. Well, here's some paper. Natalie twirled some colored sheets with stamps in her hands. Could I ask what's on it? Betty asked timidly. Wait, Anthony sighed. His hand was beginning to ache. In general, migraines had become something chronic for the man, but there was no time to take care of his health. We should go to a notary. But still, Anthony was a curious man, and looking back later, he consoled himself with the fact that he had been infected by the general excitement of the neighbors gathered here. That's why he took a quick glance at the will, and by the expression on his face, those present realized that it was serious. Selena bequeathed everything she owned, well, as if to the villagers. Everyone was silent. They surrounded Anthony in a circle, watching intently, waiting for explanations. You see here on 4 sheets of paper? It's written down in detail who gets the dishes, who gets the gardening equipment. Betty's down pillows and feathered. Natalie a Setch porcelain set with forest animals and the whole house, the plot of land without buildings. What? For me? Natalie had a heart attack. Selena, here, kind soul. We were just thinking how we would live if we had more space. And there's more, Anthony continued. Harry, there's a word about you. Me? The man marveled. And then he straightened up, his arms at his sides. So Selena hasn't forgotten my work. I fixed the wiring and whitewashed the stove. You're getting a dough pan, Anthony announced, part of his last will and test. What? A dough tin? What do I need a dough trough for, I ask you? I don't bake bread. Unfortunately, the motivation of the testator is no longer recognizable, Anthony explained, trying his best to regain a serious expression as befitting the occasion. The will also contained Celine's other instructions on how to divide everything among the villagers. The old lady had left out no one, almost no one. And if she didn't bequeath something to a particular person, she wanted to give something to a particular family. But when he got to the last line, Anthony suddenly choked like air. He stopped talking. He reread it again with rounded eyes. Then he folded the will and put it in his pocket. What is it? Harry asked. He could just feel it. His intuition told him that something important, something significant, had not been said. Who did she bequeath the money to? She couldn't have left it out. Archie, Anthony turned to the boy. Come on, we need to talk. Whoa, 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 whoa. Harry waved his hands. What's all the secrecy about? No, dear man. You tell it like it is in front of everyone. I'm serious. Anthony gave the audience a stern look. We're having a confidential conversation. Now? Okay, go ahead, said Archie. After a while, Archie came back and didn't say a word, just helping with things, the usual stuff. And with the trunk by Anthony's willful decision was dealt with, especially taking all the neighbors as witnesses. He carefully counted its contents and wrote down everything on a sheet of paper, then persuaded everyone to sign it. I'm taking it into safekeeping, Anthony said, because I'm the oldest in the village. I'll take it tomorrow to the notary, where the statement was drawn up for safekeeping. Again, everything will be in the safe. And you keep quiet about finding the money here. Understand? There's still a lot here. I don't want to push anyone into sin. Oh, come on. Harry waved his hands. No explanation, no human division. Why do I have such an unlucky karma? Or was I a wolf in my past life and didn't give the drivers any peace? Then everything was done quickly and clearly, disassembled things, cleaned up and put in order. And though Anthony kept silent, but as if everyone guessed that probably, with whom he talked privately, that person got the money. And it was kind of shocking and a little hurtful. Son, I cautiously approached Betty's son in the evening, when all the chores in the house of the deceased and in her own household were finished. Betty sat down beside Archie on the bed in his room. The eldest son was absent, together with his father had left for the district center yesterday for a shift at the local market as laborers, and now they had received an order to assemble and insulate containers for clothing merchants. Right, Mom? Well, I'm allowed. I was about to tell you myself, Archie smiled. Actually, I wasn't expecting. Tell me, is it about the money? How did you figure it out? What else? Well, in general, the will should have said where it was going. Yes, Mom, it's about the money. Betty put her hand to her chest. I couldn't believe it. How could it be? How could it be that much? There were millions of dollars in there. It was obvious to the eye. And when they counted it, it turned out to be $8,650,000. What? All of it to her son, Archie. Did Selena really treat him like her own grandson? Betty thought warmly of the fact that she had never taught her son to be such a good man. He'd grown up to be such a good man. He was eager to help her with her chores without admonition, and he became sympathetic and open to the world. And then Archie spoke. It turned out that the will also enclosed a letter from Selena's grandmother. But it was an unusual letter, a letter addressed to him by Archie. Anthony took the will for himself, and the letter, quickly running through the first lines, Archie handed over then when they went outside. It turned out she was indeed giving all the millions to Archie, but the letter that came with the will said what he should do with them. Meaning? Betty blinked off and had that little neurosis that betrayed intense mental agitation. You can't spend them as you like. It's not even yours, is it? They are, Mom. They're all mine. Archie jumped up and started pacing the room. Selena's not the kind of person. She wasn't the kind of person to force. She wrote that it's on my conscience, but that it was her dream. A lifelong dream. Betty shook her head. What a twist of fate. She was only glad that so much money had fallen into her hands, and it turned out to be a bad thing. The fact was that, according to her grandmother's last will, her Archie was to use the money to buy some merchant Walker's house. And this house, according to the descriptions in the letter, was almost a palace, with a garden attached to it. The wording of the letter was vague, strange. Selena was stingy on specifics. She only said that the house was in a neighboring region. That before the coming of Soviet power, it belonged to a merchant, his family, and then it was alternately a house of culture, a sanatorium, and finally, in the 90s, it became a museum belonging to some private person. What with the mysterious house was now Selena did not specify. But she wrote only that this amount should presumably be enough to buy it, and she also wrote that it was very important to her that the house had never been demolished, that its preservation had been taken care of. All right, let's say, said Betty. Let's say you buy the house. Then what? It's not like buying a jewelry box or a car, son. What do you mean, take care of it? What does that mean? What are you gonna do with that mansion? We're not oligarchs. It probably still needs repairs. Maybe the current owner won't even talk to you. Mom, I know it myself. Archie stopped in the middle of the room, his shoulders slumped helplessly, his head bowed. But I can't. Yes, you can. Betty raised her tone with determination. Son, such a chance, such luck. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. With this money, do you know how much you can do? You and your brother can go to school. We can buy you an apartment. Fix our house. We'll cure our father. The young man raised his head, met his parents' gaze, and his lips contorted a bad grin. People like father are incurable. Don't say that. He's your father, our family. Why, Mom? Does it really sting? How many years have you been torturing him, huh? How many times has he been coded? I ran to witch doctors. What's the use? He chose the bottle over his wife and sons. No, Mom. Archie finished speaking quieter, his voice slipping almost to a whisper. I'll do Grandma Selena's will. I don't know how she saved up so much. I don't know what's going to happen there. But I can't give a damn about what she's lived all her life for the sake of enriching my life. I'm sorry, Mom, but money, it's not the most important thing. For some time, mother and son were silent, even looking in different directions. They separated their views and thoughts, but still everything revolved around a single thing. Betty never expected that she, her family, would be able to achieve much in life. She was happy with what she had here and now. She did not like to look far. Born and raised in the same area, she graduated from the local school, and though her parents and many friends persuaded her that with such grades she could easily enter any university on a budget, but Betty refused higher education. Just, here decided so, and that's it. She was still in high school, and her spare time began to work part-time that gave it best of all needlework, and more specifically knitting. From under the quick, skillful fingers came out sweaters, mittens, dresses, scarves. Several times a year, BT brought her goods to the fair arranged in the district center, as well as fulfilled the orders of fellow villagers. But of course, only knitting was impossible to feed herself, so she worked in two other places, first as a cook at the sawmill, and then when it closed as a saleswoman in the local store, and also worked at the post office in the district center at one time. At the sawmill, by the way, was taken without any special education. By acquaintance, there worked a third cousin, and maybe even further brother. But it was only on the lack of education eyes closed on acquaintance, and the place Betty got honestly, because she could cook so that it was simply impossible to taste. From the simplest, inexpensive, ordinary products to create such masterpieces. Guests joked that Betty should keep their own restaurant, but she waked her enough for family. Friends sometimes cook. Love for cooking was so great that Betty indulged her weakness, namely bought, almost collected different spices. Her husband, by the way, grumbled that it only wasted money. But Betty, though in many ways an inferior to him, but here stood iron nobody. No one will deprive her of her habit of pampering herself with all kinds of natural vanilla, pepper from Jamaica, and other spicy gifts of nature. Betty's husband, by the way, was as if a person well-acquainted friends since childhood. But here, until now, despite the two sons born in this union, often could not understand each other. Betty married John when it became clear that there would be a child. It seemed so natural, simple. She did not even ask him if he loved her. Just when it became clear that she was pregnant after a few dates on short summer nights, she came to him and asked him what to do. Was he ready to be a father? John looked at her dumbfounded, then scratched the back of his head, mumbled that he didn't think it would turn out this way. But then he added that he was ready to take responsibility, and of course, they should get married now. And if anyone asked Betty what she thought of her years of marriage, and she was in the mood for a frank answer, she would say that it was all right. It's just so normal. When you live a quiet life and think there are no ideals, and to lament what you have is, pardon me, to anger the universe. But in recent years, Betty was ready to change her principles. She suffered many days when her husband, again breaking his promises and vows to quit, returned to the bottle. It began when he lost his job. He went on a shift on an advertisement. He thought he would get a lot of money for the family in 3 months. But it turned out that they cheated. They paid nothing. His family had to send money for a ticket home. John began to drink every day. At first it was beer, and Betty didn't even bother him because the man had worked so hard. So he had the right to relax, to heal the stress. But then, John began to choose stronger drinks, even if not every day, but he managed to get a job as a loader in the district center, working shifts, and also as a handyman. The pay was good, but her husband missed half of his salary and came home 2 days later than he promised. Betty shamed and scolded him alone, and in front of the neighbors, begged him to think about what a disgusting example he was setting for his sons. "It is sickening to look at you," she exclaimed in her heart and shook her husband by the collar, trying to lift him from the floor, where he usually fell asleep. "And you don't look," John usually answered and tried to crawl away from her attention. Betty cried bitterly every time he went on a bender. Then, remembering that she was not alone in the world, she pulled herself together and began to do chores with unusual vigor. As if scrubbing the floor, shelves, rubbing everything to a shine with manic pedantry, rearranging things in cabinets and drawers, she could mystically have a beneficial effect on the state of her husband. Archie, having once observed her in such a state, told his mother that she must be developing a psychological disorder, a form of neurosis. "Neurosis? Oh, you're a big moose. You're teaching your mother." She waved the towel at him. "Stop. Where are you going? Clean up the table. Wash the dishes. Don't let them stand there dirty. You know what they say. If you leave it dirty overnight, the devils will eat the leftovers." "What devils, Mom?" Archie sighed, but he did as she told him. "The atmosphere in this house is so toxic that the mice have already immigrated." He added the last phrase quietly, under his breath. Naturally, John's drinking habit had a negative impact on the family budget. Betty was sad, looking for somewhere else to save money. And at night, crying quietly so that no one saw, she persuaded herself that it was impossible, in no case should not stop hoping. Everything can still change. John loves her and her sons deep down, which means that one day he will succeed, he will stop drinking. And then, maybe then happiness will come to life. And now, when the truth about the old lady next door was revealed, when her beloved younger son received such money, Betty was very offended that it turned out the interests of a stranger for Archie were higher than his own family, and she thought he was a kind, open-minded soul. But there was nothing Betty could do about it. She didn't want to. She was tired of fighting for everything, and she decided to just let things go on as they were, and what would come out in the end. That's what would happen. That's it. She had enough. Archie, at these moments, when it was almost physically felt how distant from his mother the decision made, felt strange. He was sure of his own rightness, and at the same time blamed himself for the fact that he really does not think about his relatives. Archie loved his mother, his brother, though he was unbearable at times, and he loved his father too. To be more precise, there were crumbs, shards of warm feelings, and yet Archie knew he had to do what Selene wanted him to do. After all, they're not really poor. Apartments, universities, that's good, of course. He wouldn't have refused to get it for nothing. What fool would refuse? But not at the price of betraying Selena's memory. This old woman was strange for the whole village, but for him, Archie didn't want to, ashamed to admit his weakness, but to him she replaced his relatives. The thing was that he didn't know his grandparents from his father's side at all. They died in a car accident many years ago when his father was still young. And his grandparents on his mom's side had passed away when Archie was in first grade when cancer took him. "Mom, I'm going away next week," Archie said. "Dad and brother, when they get back, you'll—" "I got it. Not a word." Betty splashed her hands. "Do what you know. I've had enough of you. Go on, millionaire. I've got dinner to cook. I'm in a rut. You want fried potatoes? I can eat your potatoes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner." Archie smiled, and the peace that had been shattered by decisions about how to dispose of the inheritance that had fallen on his head was slightly restored by the compliment. Jacob and his father returned 2 days later. John wanted to go on another bender, but the eldest son didn't let him, so he caught him at a drinking establishment in the marketplace and made such a scene that he returned home ashamed and dejected. Archie hated a lot of things about his older brother, but he recognized that he had some good points, such as bold assertiveness, fearlessness, daring, and the ability to find a way out of the most difficult situations. Jacob was only 2 years older, and sometimes it seemed like 10 years. In the next few days, by the way, Archie saw the neighbors with whom he had shared his amazement at finding money in the old woman's house, and as he realized, they all kept quiet about it. Natalie, however, talked a lot, but only about the fact that she had gotten her grandmother's lot. She had already started to manage it, especially since Anthony had said that it would be considered a de facto inheritance. But he specified that it was necessary to file an application too. Anthony himself, by the way, Selena bequeathed all the books in the house, as well as an old sewing machine. Anthony assumed it was because he had a lot of women in his family. Harry was still resentful of the kitchen tools given to him for making bread, but he had also received a new book in the mail about the chupacabra, and it had distracted him somehow. Summer was in full swing, and so Archie had a great excuse to leave home to try to get into college. It's not a problem that before that he told everyone that he was going to start building his future for the next year thoroughly prepared first, so as not to fail shamefully. It's just, a person's plans can change, can't they? And so, having packed his things and said goodbye to his family, Archie stood at the bus stop, waiting for the bus first to the district center, and there the transfer to the big city. The guy looked on the internet, found out where the house was located, and decided that he should go straight there, so that he could deal with everything on the spot. Talk to the current owner. It was pouring rain. Archie lifted the collar of his jacket and fixed his cap. He thought aloofly about the fact that he had taken everything, but had forgotten his umbrella. Now he would have to spend money and buy one, but not to return home. After all, it's bad luck. He didn't think he was in a hurry. Of course, he still had to wait 6 months before he could officially receive Selena's inheritance, but there was no doubt about it. Archie was going to go to the notary in the district center after he talked to the owner of the house. Jacob's voice came over his ear so sharply that Archie flinched, and then his hand slapped on his shoulder. He looked up at his relative, puzzled, and said goodbye. Then he noticed the travel bag in his hands. What the hell is this? Apparently, all the emotion was reflected on his face, because Jacob grinned and winked. "I'm sorry about your mom, but she told me everything. She told me, not Dad. She thinks that we lost alone, and I agree with her. So, let's go together and settle everything." "I don't want to go anywhere with you," Archie replied politely but firmly. "What am I, a little boy? I can manage on my own." "Yeah, sure." Jacob seemed to be in a great mood. No, I'm with you. And don't argue with your big brother. You'll be alone. I've been living it up until now. That's the way it is back home. This is a big city. It's a serious matter. So what? Do you take me for a provincial fool? No, Jacob chuckled. Just my brother. All right, enough arguing. The bus is ours. Archie rolled his eyes. We had a deal with Mom. Why did she do that? But there was nothing to do, so we had to get on the bus. The brothers sat next to each other. So we need tow. I've already found out everything, Archie interrupted, in a hurry to prove that he was quite independent. I found out where the house is. Good, Jacob nodded. Who owns it? On the spot. That's what I thought. But I know how to use the internet better than you do, so I did some research. Quickly and clearly, as if written, Jacob outlined the history of the change of ownership of the merchant Walker's house for the last 40 years, and also explained in detail to whom it now belongs to Victoria, the daughter of businessman Steve, a well-known oligarch for the whole region. Archie admitted that he had indeed set off without learning much. We're on a mission, Jacob winked. We have to get into high society somehow. But since we live in the modern world, we'll just go to their offices and sort it out. Why are you so sour, huh? You should be happy. You're lucky to have me. Archie sighed, nodded. And then, when they came out in the district center, the rain clouds by that time had scattered as if a giant had swept across the sky with a giant broom. The brothers bought a glass of coffee at a kiosk and sat down on a bench by the monument to some important man of a distant epoch and had a snack of pies that Betty had baked for the road. By now Archie was reconciled to his brother's company, and though not aloud, only to himself, he recognized that it was even better. They didn't get along often, but there was no one closer to Jacob than his mom. Jacob was similar to Archie in appearance, with the same gray-green eyes, light blonde hair, and hunchback nose, but the older brother was broader in the shoulders and the younger brother taller. And since childhood, as soon as there were two of them and Archie was more or less conscious, they had shared the two roles. Jacob was the physical force in all their adventures, and Archie was the brainy one. Was it to steal cherries from the chairman's garden? The younger one devised a cunning plan. The older one planted and risked his sides by climbing to the highest and most fragile branches. Did you want to go to the river? Jacob would master the rods, and Archie would ask his father to tell him how to fish competently and memorize everything. If it came to being responsible for their own mischief, then here. The brothers began to intercede so zealously for one another, so took the blame for each other, that in most cases the parents only had to grab their heads and wave their hands, so to speak, not to punish by mistake the one who was not guilty. And although as they grew up in a pair of brotherly became a little more misunderstanding, but in principle they were really friendly. Jacob thought that, as the older man, he had the right to make cruel jokes. Archie wanted to be treated as an equal, and sometimes he would point out and denounce the older man's shortcomings, which of course made him very angry. Where are we staying? Jacob asked as the bus pulled into the big city. A hotel, Archie answered. I found one. He gave the address and the rate for a night's stay. Did you learn how to turn leaves into gold? The older man whistled. No, we'll spend it all in no time. Let's go to a daily rent apartment. Look, and he handed Archie his smartphone. Here, I found an agency. Reviews on independent sites are good. The deposit is small, clean, and not far from the transport interchange. And I didn't even realize. You have to think outside the box, to think through all the options. Jacob tapped his brother's forehead. I think that's why you're stalling, because you're stressed. It's a joke? So many millions. Quiet. Archie shushed him gingerly. I'm sorry. Jacob lowered his voice. I mean, if I had that kind of money, I'd go to the Maldives and party with the hotties. I should have gotten to Selena in time. Do you think there are still rich women in the village? You know, the one who breeds pigs. You should be joking. Archie shook his head. And I'm not happy about it, you know. I'd rather she'd written it off to Anthony. He's an experienced man. He'd have figured it out. He'd have figured it out for $1, but he didn't. Jacob chuckled. I think we're here. Well, here we are, big city. We'll conquer you. He shouted as soon as he got off the bus. The passengers around him looked at him like he was crazy. Archie only rolled his eyes again, his brother in his repertoire. There was nothing to do that day, so we got to the agency, checked in. It was evening. Archie warmed up for dinner what Mom had given him, fried chicken, baked potatoes, leftover pies. We could have eaten at the pizza place, Jacob sighed. There's one across the street from us. With what money? Are you sure you can't take a little of Selena's money afterward? Jacob glanced at his brother warily, like for later. Maybe we can, Archie agreed for the first time. Yay, but just a little. Wow, you could be stuffy. All right, let's go to bed. Dibs on the bathroom first. Oh please, Archie said, taking the dishes to the sink. I'll do the dishes. Oh, that's right, your mama's pride. Archie wanted to give his brother a light slap in jest, but how many jokes could he take? But he slipped out of the kitchen early. So we'll just show up and say, hello, we want to buy your house. Jacob asked the next morning when the brothers were going to the Stivopy office after breakfast. What other options are there? You're right, I guess. Jacob scratched the back of his head. It looks good on you, by the way. Jacob nodded at the fact that his brother was not wearing his usual jeans, but pants and a jacket, a white shirt, and a tie. It was the only suit in Jacob's closet left over from prom. The only thing that was out of place were the sneakers. What are you looking at? The older man asked. Cajun style, fashionable and practical. I'll shut up. Archie raised his hands in conciliation. We got to the office by subway. It turned out that the office, as the guard on the first floor said, occupied 6 floors of the business center. It was a real tower of glass and concrete, shining, reflecting the sun in its hundreds of windows. Good afternoon, please. How can we speak to Victoria? Archie addressed the girl at the reception desk politely. Mrs. Stewart is absent, she replied with a smile. What date would you like me to schedule you for? She'll be in the office in a week. That's a long wait, Jacob cut in. Where can we find her? What's this about? Personal. Jacob smiled seductively at his brother's sex appeal. Mrs. Steva here is by appointment only, said the woman named Angelica, as it was written on her badge. But if you really need it, we really need it. Jacob put his hand to his chest. It's not a matter of the heart, but it's urgent. You're not journalist, are you? Angelica was suddenly alert. No, I'm not. Jacob waved his hands. Angelica was alone in her workplace. She looked around to make sure no one was catching her doing something that was against corporate etiquette, but she wrote something down on a sheet of paper and handed it to Jacob. You can find her at this address. She's on some kind of vacation right now, and she's spending it on personal business. Please don't say I tipped you off. I can keep a woman's secrets, Jacob winked. The brothers left the office. Isn't this the address? Jacob asked, showing the sheet to his brother. You know where the house is? I'll check, he nodded. Yes, it is. This is interesting. Luck is flying in my hands. Jacob winked at him. But I guess we'll go tomorrow. We've slept too much today. But tomorrow morning, we'll talk, and then we'll be back here in the evening. And the day after tomorrow, we'll go home. You think it'll be that easy? What's so hard? The older man's attitude was very positive. Just to talk, that's all. Betty didn't want to let her sons go. Not right now, anyway. Even when Archie's things were packed, she tried to talk about the fact that, in principle, nothing could really be done. It was necessary to wait for 6 months. Then, realizing that her son had already made up his mind, Betty made it a condition to call every day, morning and evening. When they called again from the moment of departure, the older brother joked that apparently Archie could not find a bride in life, because who would want to live under such control of the mother-in-law? But Archie didn't get mad at his brother's joke. He was too immersed in his own thoughts. Not that it was a bad feeling, but he feared that with this merchant's house, nothing would be easy. The brothers paid for the apartment a day in advance because they planned to return by evening. They took a train to the right place, then a bus. Jacob dozed the whole way, and it didn't seem to matter to him that the seats were hard. He didn't care that the seats were hard, especially since he could lean his head on his brother's shoulder. Jacob looked up information on the internet and presented everything he found about the merchant Walker's house to his brother. It appeared to be in a picturesque location, close to an upscale cottage community on one side and a cottage community on the other. Let me talk to her, Archie said, as they got off the bus and headed in the right direction along the winding path that branched off the main road. On either side of the path, tall, lush meadow grasses swayed and swayed like waves of the sea. The air smelled of flowers, insects buzzed, and dragonflies fluttered their wings. Why? Jacob didn't understand. No offense, but you can be a little pushy sometimes. This is where diplomacy comes in. She's a millionaire after all. You're a millionaire yourself. That's not what I mean. She's a high society girl. So what? Is she different from ordinary girls? Jacob grumbled. I'm begging you. Let's be careful without any of this. I get it, the older man said. I wish you told me you were embarrassed of me, because you're a loser against my background. He joked at the end and winked. Finally, there was a house ahead. The grounds had once been well maintained, and the mansion was surrounded by a lush garden with lovely roses, pear and cherry trees imported from England. Now the area around the house consisted of rutted ground overgrown with wild grasses and the same wild, neglected bushes and surviving fruit trees. The fence was mostly rusted through, but the pair of stone lions on pedestals at the gate looked impressive. Archie had seen pictures of the house on the internet, and an article his brother had found for regional history buffs had old pictures of it from the turn of the century. And of course, it looked very different now. At first glance, it could seem that the house was about to collapse, but it was worth a closer look, and it became clear that it was strong, just the facade in a deplorable state. 8 bedrooms, a veranda with Egyptian-style columns, Jacob said. It's a swanky place. Do you think Selena's inheritance is enough? He's old, Archie said thoughtfully. Well, we'll see. Hello? Jacob shouted over the fence. No one answered, but a gust of wind rustled through the overgrown hawthorn bushes. They said she was here. Let's go look for her. Jacob pushed the gate open, and it opened with a shrill creak, unlatched. What the hell are you doing? Archie was frightened. This is private property. I'm just asking, his brother said. It doesn't count. When they got closer to the house, it was clear that there were people here. And when they walked around it, they realized who it was. They were construction workers. Good afternoon. Archie waved. We're looking for Victoria. A man who'd stepped away from the crew working on cleaning the old plaster off the facade waved his hand in the direction of the building. Look over there. She's looking around, though we've already determined how to work. I see, thank you, said Archie. Are you coming? Turned to his brother, who was stomping in place. You go alone, he replied, and I want to ask, how can you get a job as a builder right away, so that you don't have to study for a long time? Wait, Archie was confused. Are you going to work in construction? Why? The pay is good, and you won't be out of work, stability. I'm tired of working with my father as just anyone. Maybe later? You go ahead, I'll catch up with you. All right, Archie went in that direction. From the veranda, the house looked even more fragile. Hello, anyone there? The call went unanswered. Archie walked up the wide steps, treading the floorboards with some apprehension. Perhaps they had last been replaced in the 80s. He moved along the side of the house, looking around. He reached the tall doors and looked inside. It was dusky inside, but he wasn't in danger of breaking his legs. Archie was about to call out again to some living soul, but then he heard a rustling sound farther ahead, where a light burned behind carved doors of light wood with colored glass inserts. Entering them, he saw scaffolding here. Apparently, the main work had already been completed, and now they were only engaged in renewing the covering of the walls. At the height of 2 meters stood a girl in overalls stained with paint. Plaid pink shirt, her head was tied with a headscarf, from under which dangled a light wheat braid. A bucket of paint stood at the girl's feet, and she stretched out on her toes, wielding a paintbrush above her on the wall and humming something under her breath. Excuse me, Archie coughed. You didn't. He wanted to say, can you tell me where I can find Victoria? But apparently the stranger hadn't expected anyone to come in, so she flinched, yelped, and turned sharply. Careful, was all Archie could manage to say as she stumbled and tumbled backwards. A bucket of paint hit the floor a little too late, splashing out in a puddle that glistened in the sunlight coming through the window. And a stranger, apparently a worker from the finishing crew, collapsed on top of Archie. He was a strong guy, the height was not critical, so there were no casualties, except for the fact that Archie, having closed his arms around the girl's body, fell to the floor. The landing was cushioned by a pile of old wallpaper that no one had bothered to take out before they started painting, so Archie didn't break anything. But the air was knocked out of his lungs, and colored spots flashed before his eyes. Let me go, the rescued stranger struggled. Pressed in the chest of the guy with both palms, she tried to get up. You almost hurt me, Archie hissed. Really? She froze warily. Oh, are you all right? How can I tell, he replied, and finally risked opening his eyes. You're pushing me. The stranger's face was right next to him. She was young, barely over 20, with a small, slightly snub nose, green eyes, and cheekbones so high and defined that Archie suddenly wanted to run his fingers over them. "I don't weigh that much," the girl frowned, but slid to the side. Then she turned back to the structure she'd fallen off of. "Are you sure you didn't break anything?" "Doctor." "It's all right, don't worry," grinned Archie and sat up, rubbing the back of his head with a groan. "You saved me. I didn't plan it. And yet, forget it. What were you doing here, anyway?" she asked when we finally got up together. "I don't remember you among the workers." "I'm not one of them, that's for sure. There's someone I need to find, Victoria." "What do you want her for?" the girl asked him and looked at him strangely. "Personal business. It's just that it's customary to make an appointment." "Please tell me what an important bird this daughter of the oligarch is," Archie suddenly said sharply to himself. "Everyone has an appointment. And what if someone just needs to talk to her? They can't just do that." Depending on who and about what, the girl fixed her kerchief with a nonchalant look, bent down and picked up a bucket of paint, looked inside. There was only a little bit left. "Yeah, and if there's something wrong with that, her muzzies throw the undesirables out." Archie's been on a real tear, and if he were shown his own side now, he'd find the resemblance to his older brother quite striking. "Why do you say that?" The girl seemed offended. "Why do you have such a prejudice against the rich? Is it because they are far from the people, and they give you reasons for it?" "Excuses." Archie eloquently tapped himself on the chest near the neck. "Choke on it." The girl burst out laughing. "I don't think you have anything to say to her with that attitude. I'm afraid you'll piss her off in no time. But we'll have to talk." "How? What's the occasion?" "Why do you keep saying, 'what's the occasion?' Like you're her secretary." "You're over there." Archie's waving his hand at the wall. "Painting something, I think." "Well, paint it. I'll get out of your way. Just be careful how you fall next time. I won't save you again. See how the stucco in the whole room has been painted?" The girl's voice stopped him when he was almost to the door. Archie turned around. "It's fine, but it doesn't match the original look of the house," she explained calmly, as if she'd only talked to him about the renovation. "I found a paint similar to the original. It's unusual. It creates an effect of, how should I say it? Something like a plaster that looks wet and has a silvery cast. I decided to paint a piece of it to create a sample, so that the crew could finish it properly." Archie listened to all this and cooled down a little, but he didn't want to apologize for his rudeness. He already felt strange and awkward with this girl. For a few minutes they looked at each other in silence. Then they turned to the door, and two men entered the room, the foreman and Jacob. "There's our hostess," said the older, mustachioed foreman, Victoria herself. "Any questions you have about the house, take them up with her." Archie opened his mouth, his eyes rounded, and stared at the girl. She sent him a grin and squinted dangerously. "Let's go." Archie darted toward the exit, grabbing his brother's arm as he went, in a childish sort of way. Jacob didn't have time to say a word, following, not understanding what was going on. "What are you doing?" "There she is." "That's right," Archie muttered. The brothers had already left the mansion. "We can't make a deal with her." "Why not? Why not?" "Come on, let's go." He would have stomped on with the stubbornness of a bear awakened from hibernation at the wrong time, but Jacob was stubborn. He stood up, his hand out of his brother's grip. "What's going on, sweet man? Tell me what's going on." Archie glanced at the house behind him as if it were guilty of something, and then he told Jacob what had happened. "I was worried," the older man chuckled. "How's my youngest? Is he capable of evoking strong emotions in girls, or is he just there to mumble like he did at the club this weekend, remember?" "Give me a break." Archie waked him away angrily. "Why didn't you show me her picture?" "Should I have? I thought you were so smart. You knew everything in advance." "I told you. I'd only read who the house belonged to. I didn't think it was important to look for the photo." "No, brother, this isn't going to work," Jacob said seriously. "We're going back now, and first of all, I apologize for you, you uncouth jackass, and second of all, we're talking about this like adults. You got it?" Okay. The boys are back on the grounds of the mansion. "Are you here to see Mrs. Victoria?" The same mustachioed foreman addressed them. "She's gone." "She's gone." Archie was stunned. "She was here." "She was, but she's gone," the foreman shrugged. "What do you want?" "A businesswoman. Now, probably in 2 or 3 days she'll visit us to check how we're doing." "What business do you have with her?" He was curious. Thanks for telling me. Archie dodged the question and turned to his brother. Let's go. They didn't return to the rented apartment in the best of spirits. Jacob cheered up when they passed the pizzeria, though, and persuaded Archie to treat himself to a masterpiece of Italian cuisine, especially since the flyer the older man had just grabbed from the promoter's hands said that only today you could get 2 pizzas for the price of 1. When's the notary? Jacob asked when both pizzas were done and it was late afternoon. On the way back, of course. I have to go to the office to talk to her. Are you sure she'll want to? What else are we supposed to do? Well, theoretically, we could go to her father. He must have some power over his daughter. You have a prehistoric view of family relationships in modern society. Yeah, Jacob winked, but you're a flirting guru. She won't forget you. Maybe he's a smart guy and he'll come around, Jacob continued. I've read a little about him. He's a businessman, but he's not the kind of man to brag about his wealth. He's even helped people with his money to build a sports club for kids, and he sponsored a cat shelter. Archie wanted to return his brother's barb, going on, say about the fact that his mom couldn't teach Jacob to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs, but at that moment the doorbell rang. What's that? From the agency? I don't know, the older one went to open the door. We paid, and the cleaning was canceled. Who the hell did that? He opened the door and froze because Victoria was there. She was dressed in a scarlet 2-piece suit, a cream silk blouse with a bow at the neck, and her hair was styled in a Hollywood wave. Jacob. She smiled dazzlingly. I guess I didn't get a chance to talk to you and your brother. Can I come in? She clarified, raising an eyebrow as the boy froze in place. Eh? Yes, of course. He waved his hand, stepping aside. Archie looked out of the kitchen and immediately blushed like a beet. Good evening. How did you get here? He asked sharply. I found out who the people were and I was curious. I thought you wanted to talk about something important. No, you tell me how you found us. Archie wouldn't stop. I have my own methods, the girl said meaningfully and obviously snidely, putting her dainty purse on the corner of the kitchen table relatively clean of crumbs. But if you are busy and it is inconvenient for you. Convenient. Jacob flew into the kitchen. You have a seat. Tea. He grabbed the empty pizza boxes off the table. Okay, we've already eaten these. There's still strawberry biscuits left. You want one? Thanks, said the girl. But I'm on a diet. We can talk like this. She carefully sat down on a stool. So why did you come? Long story, sighed Archie. Well, Victoria grinned. I think I can spare some time for her. The brothers talked together, not interrupting, but deftly intercepting each other's narration. They summarized the story of how grandmother Selena had lived, then passed away, and suddenly left a strange letter, according to which, so they began to act. Fantastic, Victoria said, when the story was over. But a real story, I guess. I just didn't think anyone would care about this ruin. But you do care, Jacob said. Because my father decided to. The blonde wrinkled her pretty nose. He signed the house over to me and, well, he kind of thought it would be good for me to do something serious. He bought it himself in the mid-90s, simply because the previous owner was going bankrupt. The Handicrafts Museum, which he made here, did not bring any profit. The house stood abandoned, so repaired little by little, so that it did not collapse. What do you mean, like doing something serious? Do you have any special plans for the house? Archie asked warily. To begin with, Victoria said evasively, the money Selena left behind wouldn't be enough to buy it back. It's worth many times that because, theoretically, it could only be sold together with the land on which it stands. And the land in these parts has skyrocketed in value in recent years due to, as you could see for yourself, that new cottage village. So that's how Archie got down. He couldn't believe that it could have ended so simply and hurt Selena's memory. It turns out that the old woman had saved all her life in vain. And it seems to mean a lot to you, the girl said thoughtfully. What were you going to do with the house if you bought it? By the way, Jacob said, I personally wouldn't have bought anything. The inheritance is all his. He poked his brother almost gently in the shoulder with his fist. I'm just a backup, a moral support. I don't know, Archie answered honestly. I didn't realize he was so huge at all. And I honestly can't imagine how it could be used. I don't know. Maybe we should open a museum in there. Forgive my brother. Jacob's hand reached for Archie's head, ruffling his hair before he could dodge it. He was dropped from the stove when he was a kid. What museum, you weirdo? A museum of what? And who are you going to take there? Do you think tourists will fill the buses and pour out of the city in droves? Or locals from cottages? Cottage dwellers will go there. What are you going to do with them? Archie ignored his brother's verbal jab. He was still hoping to get a clear answer from Victoria. Daddy told me to make up my own mind. Victoria sighed, and from the look on her face, it was clear she had plenty of other interesting things to do besides messing around with the house. But maybe it would make a good country club, and the same cottage owners could be members. Or you can do something like a sanatorium. Nature, clean ecology. Anyway, we have a house, but no one knows what to do with it. Jacob slapped his hands on his knees and gave both of them a hard stare. What are we all supposed to do? I'll still be busy in the near future and nothing will change, Victoria said. Besides, there is still a lot of work to be done. In and around the house. How about we all just think about it some more? Especially since you said yourself that it should be another 6 months before the inheritance is disposed of. I'd like to know Selena's full name, her date of birth. Perhaps a private detective could help. At your expense? Jacob asked. Naturally, replied the girl. I have to go. Shall we exchange phone numbers? After exchanging contacts, she got up. Let me walk her out, Archie said. The light bulbs in the entrance on the 3rd and 4th floors are out, and the elevator's out of order. You could get stuck. The girl shrugged. She didn't usually go to houses like this. Only recently had she managed to argue for her father to stop sending bodyguards with her all the time. Not that there was any real threat. It's just that the gentleman was very worried about his daughter's fate and believed he knew best what she needed in life. Well, all right, let's go, she conceded. I'll go with you. Jacob hurriedly grabbed his jacket off the rack. They went downstairs in a small group. And then, as they opened the front door, Victoria suddenly shrieked and jerked away, so sharply that Archie just instinctively caught her in his arms. The thing was, at that very moment, an elderly resident of the house was returning from a walk with her little 3 pugs, very grumpy, who had a habit of barking at everyone they met. They do not bite, with a sweet smile and pride for their babies who so faithfully protect the mistress, said Nadisha. Yeah, we believe that. Jacob grumbled, pushing his way past the pack of pussies, which the owner had deigned to keep on their leashes for a while. The pugs disappeared into the entryway. Victoria hurriedly moved away from Archie, nervously pulled on her jacket. Thank you, I'll see you later, she said and walked away, her heels clomping. Her brothers gave her pensive looks. Jacob didn't say anything, though he'd have made a lot of jokes about it before. I guess we should go home. Archie couldn't explain it, not that he'd ever thought about it, but his relationship with his brother had improved since he'd gotten home. No, Jacob, of course, was still essentially the same. He was still the same man who could shirk chores, who liked to sleep in before dinner, and who could say things that made the other person feel defeated or get into a fight. But with his younger brother, he stopped teasing and taunting him. Archie thought for a moment that it might have something to do with the fact that it would soon be time to get Selena's money, and maybe Jacob was just counting on something. But Archie also knew his brother too well to stick to that theory as the main one, so he just dismissed all the theories and decided to live his life the way it was. And time passed. The season changed and winter came, unusually warm but generous with soft, fluffy snowfalls. Several times during those 6 months, Archie and Jacob called Victoria, and she sent them pictures of the house, and it had changed. It now looked sturdy, updated, and yet it still had that old-fashioned charm. They didn't talk about what to do next. Victoria only said that the specialists she had hired from the detective agency had so far reached a dead end. They were in shock themselves, but it was almost impossible to find information about Selena, and time was running out, and soon the date would come after which Archie had the right to dispose of the inheritance. And he also had a secret from his brother. It all happened one December evening when he suddenly received a message from Victoria. "Hi, what are you doing?" he replied. "Looking for a cat in the barn. She's got kittens somewhere." "Cool. Do you want to keep it? We'll give them to the neighbors and one for ourselves. Lavender's a great mousetrap." "Your cat's name is Lavender? That's original. I'm at a meeting my father told me to go to. It's awfully boring here. You're not going into town by any chance?" "I am." "What for?" "To get my tooth fixed. A filling fell out." "I'm sorry. They opened a new skating rink here. I don't have anyone to go with. Maybe you can keep me company." "Okay, Archie hadn't thought that the couple of days he'd spent in Victoria's company would resonate in his heart like this. He recognized her as a different kind of person, not businesslike and especially not flashy. She behaved like the most ordinary girl. They went for rides, strolled through the winter park, which had already been decorated with garlands around the trees. Once Archie treated her to coffee and donuts, and another time she paid for hot tea and hot dogs for two, so that in the end no one felt awkward. This small equality as if erased for the time of meetings between the young people the difference in social status that existed. And then Archie found out the address to which Victoria could send a parcel, and for New Year's Eve he sent her mittens made by his mother, blue, with beautiful white snowflakes. Victoria was delighted and sent a photo where she was in a white mink coat and these mittens. Archie received a return gift of a suitcase with a set of all sorts of useful things for winter fishing. And this budding, sort of buddy relationship, Archie kept it a secret from everyone. He wasn't thinking about Victoria in a styptic sense. Just, suddenly he realized that he cared about this girl. Steve was a man of business, and he was accustomed to keeping all matters in which he was involved in one way or another under strict control. The time of formation of his business came to the dashing 90s, from which the man learned the main lesson: success and prosperity is impossible without rigor, thoughtful approach, and control of emotions. However, with the latter in the life of Mr. Steve were some difficulties, and the reason for this were his two daughters, Victoria and Maddie. And if the second youngest was still somehow obeying her father, then the behavior of the first was a disaster. But it wasn't that the girl spent money on boutiques, disappeared at night in clubs, became the main heroine of social scandals. If only everything were so simple. Such behavior would not disturb Steve at all, would not make him sit up deep past midnight without sleep, thinking hard. Because he would know the daughter behaves like many daughters of his acquaintances and friends. It's all temporary, a kind of youthful protracted rebellion. A little time would pass, and she would understand that her father is the main person in her life, whose will is the law. But everything was quite different. Everything was much worse. Steve was brought out of such an uneasy mood by the sound of light, rapid footsteps. "Hello, daughter," he said and smiled at Victoria. Beauty froze on the spot, did not expect to see her father at this time at home. He was supposed to be lost in the office as usual. But she immediately pulled herself together and smiled back. "Hi, Daddy," and added cautiously, "Did something happen?" "Yes," he nodded, "and you know it." "I don't know what you mean." "Listen, daughter." Rising from the couch, Steve took a few steps towards her. The conversation was taking place in the living room of the mansion where Steve lived. "I heard you had another fight with Oliver, and you also turned down an invitation to a reception at the house. Since when do you believe gossip, Dad?" Victoria asked mockingly, but Steve could hear the tremor in her voice. The girl took a few steps back, retreating, folded her arms across her chest, and it didn't take a practiced psychologist to read, decipher that defensive gesture. "Ever since my eldest daughter gives me such excuses," he grinned. Victoria froze in place. She lifted her chin stubbornly. "I'm tired and sleepy, Daddy. I'm going to my room, and we can talk later." "Now." "Daddy, I know you're upset that I don't want to. You don't want to think a little bit about your future." "Maybe it's because I want to build it myself, and not according to your standards and molds." Victoria sighed, realizing that it would be impossible to escape from the difficult conversation. "Not this time. I've done everything for you and your sister, but you don't coddle Maddie." "Victoria, watch your mouth. And you watch what you do." The girl snapped. "Yes, I don't want to fawn over those you consider worthy of society. Yes, I don't want to pretend I like living like this. And as for Oliver, we have nothing in common, Papa. I don't know what kind of a wild thing you're doing, but I'm not marrying him." "Daddy." Victoria sighed and tried to find a key to the person she loved the most. "I know I've made you worry. You think I was just worried when my daughter disappeared from home, didn't answer the phone. I was afraid of you." Steve choked on the words. "You have no idea how scared I was. You think that was good for me. And you, what did you do? You ran away to some provincial shithole, went to that stupid university, lived in that barn." "It was a normal dormitory," Victoria shrugged. "The thing was that a few years ago, just after she came of age, Victoria ran away from home. She left by train, taking almost no money and things with her, threw away her SIN cards and got to one town, enrolled as a doctor there. Her father found her, brought her home, locked her up for 2 months. Only servants and a psychologist were allowed to see the girl, who, on Steve's orders, tried to change her outlook on life. The girl seemed to come to her senses. And then she did it again. She started kicking again, decided that she could live apart from the world to which she belonged by birthright, to which her father belonged. Steve supposed that, in principle, this was not only his fault, but also the fault of Victoria's mother and Rita, whom he had divorced a few years ago, having caught the socialite in adultery. He feared that his daughters could not accept that he could not forgive their mother to keep the family together. That's why they periodically surprised him unpleasantly. This year, Steve made another attempt to re-educate Victoria. He signed over to her an old mansion outside of town. He told her that this was a test of her maturity and maturity, that she would have to decide what to do with the house, to make any use of it. Victoria was a little shocked, but agreed. Steve hoped that it would help her to understand how the really important things in life worked, to see what she could achieve with her own hands. He hoped that Victoria would like such an unusual business, and she would somehow relent, especially since the girl was already in her last year of university, had finally studied at the faculty he had chosen for her, and was about to become an excellent manager with the potential of a crisis manager. As for Oliver, he was, in Steve's opinion, a very worthy young man, the son of one of his business partners, with whom Victoria, by all accounts, would have a great marriage. What have you decided to do with the house? I saw the renovation report. Steve continued in a much calmer tone. You did a great job. You spent less money than I gave you, and the quality of the work is excellent. I see that you know how to follow people. I haven't decided yet. Victoria's not buying the praise. You know, I've been meaning to talk to you. Well, I think Oliver will help you decide, and the house will be a great part of the dowry. Daddy. Victoria had just wanted to tell him that strange story about two boys, one of whom was doing the will of a mysterious old woman, but changed her mind when her father brought it up. I'm not going to marry him, for crying out loud. His father agrees with me. You two make a great couple. I think I'll invite Oliver and his father over for dinner on Sunday, and you'll be there. Okay, Dad. Victoria averted her eyes. She was once again so disappointed in her father. He sometimes seemed to start listening to her, but he didn't hear her at all. Can I go to my room? Go on, nodded Steve. You need to get some rest. And so do I. Archie wasn't surprised when Victoria called him, but he thought they were going to talk about nothing. But when he finished the conversation, which only lasted about 5 minutes, he hurried to find his brother. Jacob was in the yard, cursing quietly under his breath as he repaired the fence that his father had broken the day before. It turned out that the repair of the house was finally finished completely, and the girl invited the brothers to see what became of it in the end. And she also said that the private detective finally found some information about Selena's grandmother. The circumstances were favorable for both brothers, and their father, ashamed of his own antics, seemed to be sober as a whistle for at least the next few days. Betty, however, was not at all happy that her sons were going away. She could not understand how they could communicate normally with this girl, who belonged to a different world. And this she did not know about Archie's meeting with her. It was as if Betty had been personally offended that at the beginning of the story Victoria had refused to sell the house for the money that was soon to be at Archie's disposal. But of course, if the brothers were going to do what the mother wanted, the only thing to do was to agree. They left on the next bus. Okay, I'll tell the neighbors that you, and she pointed her finger at Jacob, went into town to get your tooth fixed. I haven't had a toothache since I was a kid, he marveled. And we're having a chorus here. And then Archie's had it treated recently. What do you want me to say? Betty squinted. The truth? No. Our family don't need that kind of happiness now. You're a bit ill for everyone, and your brother's gone with you to support you, so when will you be back? In a couple of days, Archie said. Another expense on our heads, Mother grumbled. You should ask this millionaire for what you spend on the road and on lodging. Mom, don't start, please, eh? Archie asked piteously. Then he kissed his parent on the cheek and went to pack. The merchant Walker's house met them with a majestic, mysterious bulk in the thickening dusk. The brothers went up on the porch. Jacob nodded at the bell button. The house looks like it's been completely renovated. I wonder what it's like inside. It's one thing in pictures, but in person. A girl opened the door a couple minutes later. Hello, said the brothers in unison. The girl smiled and without saying a word, went deep into the house. What's she doing here? The eldest turned to Archie. And then, entering the big hallway, he almost shrieked because there were two Victorias in it. One was the one who'd opened the door with the new short haircut and pink sweater, and the other with the light lilac sweater and the same long hair. "What are those?" Jacob asked. "They're cute," the second Victoria said. "Oh, stop it," said the other girl. "This is my sister Maddie. And as you've already noticed, we look a lot alike, almost like twins. I'll admit that resemblance sometimes scares me." "Wow," Jacob said, "you two could be confused. I thought I was hallucinating." Archie didn't say it out loud, of course, but he was surprised to note that Victoria was different from his sister. Victoria seemed to him prettier, gentler. They've remodeled the place, he appreciated the house, and Archie hurried to ask the topic of conversation. "My sister's just greedy." Maddie elbowed Vika in the side. "You could have told me that Daddy bought her a whole house. Maybe I wanted to play in the renovation too." "I didn't want to take you away from the sheep and goats," Victoria replied, and explained to her brother's puzzled looks. She studied to be a veterinarian in Australia, so she got her diploma and came for a vacation. A veterinarian? Jacob couldn't hide his amazement. "I never would have guessed that." "Why?" Maddie asked. "Because you are," he waved his hand in the air. "Your daughters." "What a father does doesn't oblige us to do the same thing," Maddie said. "Personally, I choose my own way and will do only what I want and decide. And Dad can only put up with it. And the main thing, of course, not to make mistakes, that he is kind, just silk. Do not get into stories, do not have bad habits." "I respect that approach," Jacob grinned. "Let me show you the rooms," Victoria said. "It's all set up. The house is fully habitable. It even has its own generators for heating, but we didn't buy any furniture. We only bought the bare necessities in a couple of rooms when we were still renovating, so we wouldn't have to sleep on the bare floor if we had to stay late." "Is there a kitchen here?" Jacob asked suddenly, when the mini excursion was over. It turned out that the room the brothers had decided they would share was on the first floor, across the hall from the girls' room. "Yes, right here," Victoria led the small group to the appropriate room on the first floor. "Where's the store?" Jacob continued to attend to their daily needs. "We'd have to make a quick run." "Why?" Maddie said. "We could order delivery. There's more stuff in the fridge." "Oh, let's order pizza. We'll build a fire in the fireplace, sit around and talk." "Yay." Jacob put his arm around the girl's shoulder in a friendly way. "Oh man," he looked her in the eye. "Aren't you afraid of, well, to invite two boys alone and stay with them?" "Do you have bad intentions?" Maddie asked in a lowered voice. Jacob shook his head in the negative. "Good," said Victoria's sister. "So it's all good. Who likes pizza with what? And since I'm here to visit my sister, it's my treat." We spent the evening as we had planned by the fireplace. There was a blizzard outside at night, and even though we were traveling with the same plans, in the end, no one talked about business. They talked about anything but business. Maddie was very chatty, recalling funny stories from her childhood with her sister, talking passionately about her time on a distant continent. Jacob shared tales of life in his home village, and Archie talked more about their family. Eventually, they all went to bed and went to their rooms. The next morning, Maddie, who had gotten up earlier than everyone else, made hot chocolate and toast with cheese in hand. After breakfast, they went outside to look at the house from the outside, for the workmen had restored the 19th century stucco on the veranda side of the house. Then they played snowballs by themselves and again about the business that had brought the brothers here, and were silent all day. "Did you say you found out something about Selena?" Archie said in the evening, when they were gathered around the fireplace again. "Yes, I'll get it right away." The girl jumped up, went to her room, then came back with a paperback. "Here," she pulled out a photograph and held it out to Archie. Jacob leaned closer, looking at it too. "That's our Selena," his older brother marveled. "She was pretty when she was young, wasn't she?" The black and white photograph showed a group of young people, a few boys and girls standing near a fountain. Victoria pointed to a stately brunette in a white flowered dress. That was young Selena. "Isn't that the fountain in the yard?" Archie asked. "Yes, and the house looks similar." "That's right," said Maddie. "This photo was taken in the late 40s. It was a vacation home back then. Do you know what the detective found out? He dug into the archives and found out that these young men worked here, at the rest home. Selena in the dining room as a waitress." "How did you get this photo?" Jacob asked. "There is a small private historical museum in town. They had a collection of photos, and this one was among them." "I have something," Jacob said suddenly. "What? What do you mean?" Archie didn't understand, because his brother had never talked to him about anything like that. Don't be angry, okay? I thought I'd better show you when we're all together. Anyway, I went to Natalie's house to help, and she's doing some major remodeling. Turns out Selena not only had a stash in the closet, but also in the bedroom. Anyway, we found it there. Now I have to go for a minute. Jacob went into his room and came back with a hardcover notebook. The pages were shabby yellowed, but it was still legible, written in Selena's large, elegant handwriting. Grandma kept a diary, or not even a diary. Anyway, she didn't have anyone to talk to, not even you, brother. Jacob looked sympathetically at Archie. She didn't fully trust. Anyway, I guess she's got her life story in here. And you didn't read it? Matey marveled. If I had, I couldn't resist. I wanted to, Jacob admitted. But I thought we should know its contents for the first time, all of us together. Agreed? No one disagreed. The flimsy, yellow pages rustled, and Jacob began to read aloud. Selena's family was from the Far East, where they lived in a village and the surrounding land bordered on forests so wild that when they went to work in the fields, they had to worry about being dragged away by a tiger. Selena's youth was a difficult time, and besides there were 5 children in the family, all of them young. But they grew up, raised all of them on their feet, and even sent 2 of them to study in the city to get a higher education. Selena herself thought that she would spend all her life in her native village. She would not see the world, but suddenly she found a talent for such a craft as sewing dresses. At first she made dresses for herself, for her girlfriends and relatives, and then a dressmaker from a distant town, Elizaveta Makarova, found out about it. She was an old friend of the chairman of the collective farm and was a difficult woman, spectacular and importantly with great connections. She suggested why Selena hid her talent here for rural life, when in the big city can earn well, live very differently. The girl agreed. It seemed to her that she was like in a fairy tale. But of course it was impossible to work openly as a private dressmaker, and Elizaveta got her protagonist a job as a waitress in a rest house. It was considered a very big place for those times, and how convenient it was to find clients among the vacationing wealthy citizens. Selena's position did not allow her to count on a service room in the rest house, but Elizabeth settled her in the house of her sister, who lived in the village, and it was convenient. There was also set up a small home atelier, where Selena sewed outfits on weekends and went an evening after work. Everything was going great in Selena's life. But then she fell in love with a completely unsuitable man. He was the director of the vacation home, Barry. He was married to a woman, figuratively speaking, from the very cream of society, and was also spoiled by the lady's attention, and to count the hearts he broke would need to take a spruce branch. And then one day Selena realized that she was pregnant. She believed Barry would give up everything for her. After all, he had no children of his own. The woman he married was herself a widow with a teenage daughter. But as it happened, Barry's wife found out about Barry's affair. She came to Selena and she told her that she was expecting a child. And this woman started making threats. She said that Selena's baby would be taken away from her and that she would face a lawsuit for secretly working as a dressmaker. Selena was terrified. She realized that she and Barry would never be together. Breaking up with him was easier than she had first thought. He had a new crush on a young nurse at the rest home. It all broke Selena's heart, and she decided to just leave. Far away, a clean slate. It turned out to be a simple workforce needed all over the country. So Selena moved to the village of Zvezno, the yards of which at that time, like satellites, revolved at the prosperous collective farm, Alaya Zarya, which surprised even the capital. All sorts of records from milk yields, harvests, and so on. Selena abandoned sewing. It was too reminiscent of the past, became a simple milkmaid, and raised her son alone, not paying attention to the oblique glances of fellow villagers. And Selena also decided that she would never marry. Her son, Arnold, had grown up to be a good boy. Selena wished him the best fate and sent him to study in the city for an engineer, help with money, regularly sent gifts from ordinary potatoes and sauerkraut to homemade sausages and through the 10 pans of smoked redfish. Arnold was very similar to his father's face. He grew up a real go-getter, was a sportsman, Komsomol member. In general, his mother could not be pleased with him. And then he died. Tragedy happened in one of the tourist trips in the mountains. Selena was destroyed by grief. She completely withdrew into herself. She constantly thought about what if Barry had eventually learned the truth and chose her, would have given her a real family, then everything would have turned out differently and her son would be alive. Time passed. Selena retired and realized that it was hard for her to stay in her old place, pressured by memories. So she moved to the village of Pompeii, where she began to live a lonely, isolated life. Now she was living with memories. It seemed to her that the real happiness was there in the past when she worked at the rest home. An easy, carefree life. And one day Selena packed up and went there and got herself a ticket and spent time in a place where the hopes of her youth were dashed and where it was so good at the same time. She even saw Barry. He was still the principal, but he didn't recognize her. In the following years, Selena began to visit the vacation home regularly, but she was already looking at it from so far away. She herself wrote in her diary that her thoughts became sometimes confused. It seemed to her that parts of her soul remained in that house. And then, when the country went through great changes, she thought that perhaps she could save money, a lot of money, and buy this house, and she could live out her life in it. Then, when she was well into her 90s, Selena realized that she probably wouldn't have time to realize her dream, because she didn't know if she had enough money. And she was afraid that no one would want to do business with her, old as she was. But she just could not imagine that the house would stand in disrepair, that it could one day become a ruin. That's why she wrote the letter to the will, to prevent that from happening. She just wanted to save the house at all costs. Barry was my grandfather, Victoria said quietly as the journal was read and closed. The girl sat looking at the fire in the fireplace. Grandmother, I thought she was always so kind, wasn't she? How could she do this? So Selena's related to us, Maddie said. Distant, but related. And we didn't know. And she's all the way. How awful. Just like that, all alone. If only it were possible to go back in time and change everything, Victoria sighed. It's just not fair. They were silent for a while. The wood in the fireplace was almost burned out. Jacob got up and added a few more. It's getting late. It's probably time to go to bed, he said. You know what they say, don't you? The morning is the morning. The next morning, everyone woke up to a knock on the door. Who the hell is that? Maddie asked irritably, looking out of the room in her funny warm unicorn pajamas. I don't know, Victoria said as she went to open the door. Father must have sent someone to tell us he wanted to see us. Oh, tell Jacob and Archie to be quiet as mice. Can you imagine how angry he'd be if he found out about all this? But to the girl's amazement, it wasn't her father's man at the door, but the man her father saw as the best man for her. Oliver, what are you doing here? I've come to fetch my fiancée, the young man said sternly and walked into the house. He looked around with a sour expression. What a dump. What do you know? Victoria dismissed him. This house, by the way, with a great history, and maybe we can turn it into something decent, Oliver went on. What? It's mine, and I didn't ask for your opinion. Victoria followed indignantly. And this one here, Oliver threw down unhappily when he saw Maddie. And you, he turned to Victoria. You must realize that a husband's word is always weightier than a wife's. Victoria felt strange. She was very afraid to make the next step, and at the same time she realized that it was the only possible option. Just now she suddenly remembered the contents of Selena's diary vividly. How many injustices she had suffered in her life. And now, within the walls of the same house where her fate once broke, a new madness is taking place. I will not marry you, resolutely and loudly, almost shouted Victoria. It's over between us. Girl, grinned, squinting unkindly at Oliver. What kind of hysteria is this? Our parents. The fact that you jump like a trained dog at your father's commands is your problem. Maddie stood up for her sister, but Victoria's not like that, and you two aren't even right for each other. What's wrong? Jacob came out of the room. The guy's not used to getting up this early. Archie followed him out. Well, Oliver said, very interesting. What's that supposed to mean, sweetheart? You decided to set up a brothel here while Daddy's not around? Victoria didn't realize how it had happened, but the next moment Oliver was slapped in the face. The girl's arm ached from the force of the blow. Don't you dare talk to me like that. And get out, or I'll call security. And I will never, you hear me? I will never marry you. You're insolent, stupid, arrogant. I'm not the enemy of my own fate. Oliver stared at her dumbfounded. Then he touched his cheek, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. So that's how it is, he grinned. Well, good. You are no longer my fiancée. But so no thanks to you, a new contract between your father and mine. My dad's a strong man, Victoria said calmly. They'll find ways to run his business even if everyone turns their backs on him. But his business will never include me as an asset to be sold to anyone. Okay, man. Archie came up to Oliver, blocking Victoria from him. You gotta go. Who the hell are you? Oliver was ready to lash out at the protector of his now ex-fiancée. No, Victoria grabbed Archie's arm. Don't. Please, for my sake, she finished quietly, and at that moment she met the boy's gaze. Archie didn't realize what it was. He just suddenly realized that he would do anything for this girl. He nodded. Your reputation is ruined, and I'll take care of it. Oliver threw Oliver out when he had already left the house and reached his car. You know what? Victoria answered him from the porch. I don't care about my reputation with people I'm not going to live among. Do you understand? And I don't care who or what you tell. Sis, get back inside. You'll catch cold. Maddie pulled her back in. You did the right thing. Jacob told his brother before the girls came back. I wouldn't have held back if I were you. But you did the right thing. I thought you were going to tease me about being a coward. Archie grinned wryly. I used to. What's different now? I don't know. I just feel like I've had a different outlook on life in the last few months. It's weird, isn't it? Why? People, Mom says, can change a lot of things in life, Archie replied. I'm afraid I have to go away, said Victoria, who was back in the house, shivering from the cold. I better talk to my father myself. Isn't he forbidding you at home? Jacob asked abruptly. No, Victoria smiled. We're past that stage. I think we just need to talk calmly. Yes, Dad can be tough sometimes, but when I tell him what Oliver said, he'll definitely be on my side. He's just under the delusion that Oliver is a good and decent man. You know, figuring out family relationships is all very important, Maddie said. But what are we going to do with all this? She waved her hands. With the house, we have to decide something. I've already decided. Victoria looked at her brothers carefully. You know, I think Celine would like it if this house became what it used to be. How about we own it in half? You and me. Theoretically, of course, I could give it all to you. But in terms of management, it would be convenient if I were also the owner. I'm not following you, Archie said honestly. Oh yes, I started at the wrong end, sorry, laughed Victoria. Let's go to the kitchen. It would be good to make breakfast, and I'll tell you what I suggest. Over frying an omelette and toast, which this time was sweet with raspberry jam, and brewing coffee on the stove in a turbo, Victoria outlined her idea. The girl proposed to make the house, once owned by Merchant Walker, a vacation home. A place where people could forget about the hustle and bustle of the city and the fast pace of life. But there was one more important nuance. Victoria said that she knew several good charitable foundations, in alliance with which everything could be arranged so that the guests of this vacation home were children from needy families. The girl vividly told how she sees everything in the house. Of course, it will be necessary to redo a lot of things, to make the rooms into rooms where children can do something creative, play. It will also be necessary to competently organize the canteen and the food system in general. And a large yard can be turned into a flowering garden where there will be playgrounds and sandboxes for kids. A mega project. Jacob expressed his opinion. But it's all complicated and expensive, finished Maddie. I'm sure the two of you couldn't manage it, and my sister and I couldn't do it alone. But if we work together, and if we get the right people to support us. She paid attention to the ruddy toast and then continued. It could work. It's a good idea. Archie looked at his brother. Girls, just don't take offense. But we belong to different worlds. It might be easy for you to do charity work like this. But for us, you know, we have to think about our lives, our families. So, it's not gonna work out. Now listen to me, Victoria looked at Archie gently, yet sternly. And don't take offense either. First of all, I'm going to sell you half of the plot with the house for literally 1,000. I mean, it's a token price. And yes, I don't think that's against Selena's wishes. She wanted you to take over the house. She will. But I think you're entitled to some reward after all these years of being Selena's selfless friend. I'm good with numbers, by the way, and I'm well aware that this kind of charity requires resources, time, and money. And I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Tony, what do you and your brother do best? What do you mean? Archie doesn't get it. What were you thinking of doing for a living next? Maddie explained for her sister. I want to be a builder, Jacob said. I was thinking. Something to do with farming, Archie replied. If I offered to go into the construction business and the farming business, would you agree? Transparent, no investment. You just need to slowly get into everything and work well. The brothers looked at each other. Honestly, Jacob reached for his toast too. Sounds like fun, but it's not that I'm uncomfortable accepting help like this. Do you refuse to help talented people achieve much in life? Mady asked. No, but Archie tried to object uncertainly. We're not offering you $1 million salary outright. Just, we'll make some investments, so to speak, with your help. We can say that you will repay us for this support by spending your time and moral strength to work with our main project, the vacation home. Sounds like a fairy tale, Jacob said suddenly. You know, the ones where the youngest son does something, and then he meets a magical wonder and bam, he becomes a king. Who are you calling a miracle worker? Maddie's got her hands on her sides. I'm just saying, Jacob was embarrassed. You're very pretty. I've never met anyone like you before. Thanks for the compliment, but I'm the spitting image of my sister, so we're both pretty, right? Well, yes, but Jacob was even more embarrassed, and Archie couldn't remember that about him before. You're different. More. Combative. And then, I like you, and your sister is my brother's sister. What? Victoria's hand shook, and she spilled coffee all over herself. Well, thank you, Archie's brother said to Archie. No offense to the truth, Jacob snatched the last of his toast. You think I don't know you two met in the winter? Actually, I saw the whole thing. Were you following us? Victoria was outraged. And the doorbell rang again. I'm going to get heartburn from nerves, Mady muttered and went to open the door. The others followed her. Dad? The girl exclaimed and stepped back. Steve came into the house looking like a big bear lost in the woods, his expensive coat covered with snow, frost on his mustache and neatly trimmed beard and eyebrows. Mady thought that perhaps now, for the first time in her life, her father would faint for a reason. But he suddenly, with a quick glance at the boys, suddenly stepped toward her sister and hugged her tightly. My girl, what a clever girl I have you. What's going on? Jacob hissed to his brother. Shouldn't we be running away? So this is who they are, Steve said, releasing his daughter from his embrace. My daughter's mysterious friends. Daddy, you? Where did you come from? You think I don't know what my own daughter does? Steve touched his daughter's cheek affectionately. I'm sorry, honey, I was a stubborn fool before. Daddy, explain what's going on. Maddie exclaimed. Or, I'm afraid that you've been replaced by aliens. It turned out that Steve this morning received a report from the head of his security service, according to which his business partner Oliver's father planned to seriously harm his business, to frame him, to deprive him of almost everything. And what's more, Oliver intended to get more influence in the joint business with Steve by marrying Victoria. Naturally, Steve was furious. He could forgive a lot of things, but not treachery. And now in his daughter's desperate resistance to the imposed marriage, he saw almost a sign of fate. He thought that his Victoria had awakened intuition. He was really watching her, and at first, he didn't know how to react. He just suddenly realized, which was surprising for him, that he liked this simple guy Archie. It seemed to Steve that he had a positive influence on his daughter. It was no secret to him that Victoria had ordered a search with a private detective. Over the next few hours, the small group talked a lot among themselves. Jacob was the first to take the initiative and personally handed Selena's diary to Steve, saying that it was probably important for him to know it. Steve left the young people briefly to read it, and then first of all, he demanded his daughter to tell him what she had decided to do with the house, and secondly, unexpectedly, he said that he supported her wholeheartedly. I didn't realize you were like that, said Archie. Like what? You say what you think boldly. Smiled at the guy Steve. Well, you don't fit the stereotype of millionaires, so you don't mind. This whole thing? Actually, I think that this is exactly the kind of change I've been missing in my life. Or else I'll confess to my daughters, though not easily. I think I've gotten too caught up in business and its accompanying conventions. I've forgotten what's really important. Look, it's cold at home. Girls, where can we get a fireplace around here? Steve called the office to say that the company's shareholder board meeting was canceled for today. She had a family emergency. And there was much more talked about that evening, and even more thought. Archie and Jacob planned how happy his mother would be when she realized that almost all the money would still be in the family. Archie dreamed of giving his mother a sea of rare spices. Jacob was determined to put his father in the best hospital and not let him out until he was cured. Victoria thought about how much better the mansion was going to be soon. and Steve was thinking that perhaps his daughter needed a guy like Archie, ordinary and yet so extraordinary. Steve was surprised that this young man, having received such money, wanted to spend it so boldly on the dream of his grandmother, who was a stranger to him. Steve was determined to have a serious talk with him soon. And prompted by the fact that Victoria had a dream from her youth that when she met her future spouse, it would be simply fabulous if he proposed in the spring under the blossoming trees. In the courtyard of the house, as Steve remembered, just had to be luxuriantly blooming in the spring cherry trees.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.